So as a sort of supplement to my last video about Schelling, I wanted to read some selections from the third draft of Schelling's Ages of the World, which was probably written around 1815, but was never published in his lifetime. Eventually, his son Carl published it in 1856, 2 years after he died. The originals were destroyed. Schelling's original manuscripts, written manuscripts, were kept in a chest and were destroyed during the firebombing of Berlin um, during World War II. So I'm going to begin in the preface here, where Schelling has just been telling us about um, this sort of doubling of nature and of God, in fact, the way that yes, God is one, but doesn't entirely coincide uh, with God's self. There's somehow what Schelling calls a scission of forces, that God has an inward pulling, um, self-identifying uh, force or power, and an outward pushing or other um, identifying or loving, you could say, way. So there's the wrath of God, and then there's the love of God. Um, Gravity that pulls in to the center, um, to the ultimate or absolute subject, and there's light, gravity and light, and the light is the object. It expands to fill space, um, and to generate appearance. Um, and this scission, says Schelling, this doubling of ourselves, this secret circulation in which there are two beings, a questioning being and an answering being, an unknowing being that seeks knowledge, and an unknowing being that does not know its knowledge. This silent dialogue, this inner art of conversation, is the authentic mystery of the philosopher. From the outside, this conversation is thereby called the dialectic, and the dialectic is a copy of this conversation. When the dialectic has become only form, it is this conversation's empty semblance and shadow. Therefore, everything known, in accord with its nature, is narrated. But the known is not here something lying about, finished and at hand since the beginning. Rather, the knowing is that which is always first emerging out of the interior through a process entirely specific to itself. The light of knowledge must rise through an internal scission and liberation before it can illuminate. What we call knowledge is only the striving toward anamnesis, and hence more of a striving toward knowledge than knowledge itself. It is more than a striving toward or loving of knowledge than knowledge itself, which is a reference to a line in Hegel's, early in Hegel's preface to the Phenomenology, where he says that his aim is no longer philosophy or the love of wisdom, um, but is knowledge itself. So he isn't a philosopher. He has become wise. Schelling is here saying um, that really we can only strive to remember the truth. We cannot become it. or at least this very striving is the becoming of truth. I admit the difference between Hegel's position and Schelling's is probably difficult to, um, to notice there, but let's continue to think along with Schelling here. For this reason, the name philosophy has been bestowed upon it incontrovertibly by that great man of antiquity. Um, I think he's talking about Pythagoras. Hence the view, harbored from age to age, that philosophy can be finally transformed into actual knowledge through the dialectic, and to regard the most consummate dialectic as knowledge itself, betrays more than a little narrowness. So this view, in other words, is narrow. The very existence and necessity of the dialectic proves that it still in no way is actual knowledge. In this regard, the philosopher is situated in no other circumstance than any other historian. In order to know what they want to know, the historian must also question the testimonies of old documents, or the recollection of living witnesses. They need ample discrimination or critical activity in order to separate the false from the true, the erroneous from the correct, in the received traditions. They also need discrimination in themselves, from whence belongs the customary saying that they must seek to liberate themselves from the concepts and peculiarities of their time. There are still many other similarities, but it would be too drawn out to speak of them here. Everything, absolutely everything, even that which by nature is eternal, must have already become internal to us before we can present it externally or objectively. If the writer of history does not awaken in himself or herself the past age whose image they want to project to us, then they will never present it truly, nor vividly, nor in a lively fashion. What would happen, what would all history be, if an inner sense did not come to assist it? It would be what it is for so many who indeed know most all that has happened, but who know not the least thing about the actual history. Not only human events, but the history of nature has its monuments, and one can surely say that they do not abandon on their wide path of creation any stages without leaving behind something to indicate them. These monuments of nature, for the most part, lie there in the open, and are explored in manifold ways, and are, in part, actually deciphered. Yet they do not speak to us, but remain dead, unless this succession of actions and productions has become internal to human beings. Hence everything remains incomprehensible to human beings until it has become internal to them, that is, until it has been led back to that which is innermost in their being, and to that which to them is, so to speak, the living witness of all truth. Now, what he's saying there, I think, is contrary to all modern philosophy, all Cartesian philosophy, in that the Cartesian philosophy separates res extensa from res cogitans, the thinking substance from the extended substance. What Schelling is saying here is that even natural history, the becoming of the external world, the physical world, um, must, in order to be known, must be remembered within the human mind itself, so that, in another sense, the task of philosophy is really one of producing a natural history of our mind. Schelling's own words there, that philosophy is to become the natural history of our mind. So unless we can really feel what it means that elements were forged in the explosions of stars, unless we can feel what it means that our traits are stored in uh, sperm and ovum in a genetic network, unless we can feel that genetic reality taking place within our immediate experience, then that knowledge isn't real for us. And we simply talk about concepts that we've heard in lectures or read in books without having a sense for who and what they are. Um, and so for Schelling, a philosophy of nature, a knowledge of nature, must treat nature um, as a who, as something with personality and life, rather than as a machine, as the modern Cartesian approach to nature would have it. Schelling's is, you could say, a re-enchanted uh, cosmology and philosophy. It's a spiritual philosophy and a philosophy of freedom, and in that sense carries with it a sort of moral calling and a kind of religiosity that is no longer belief. It's a philosophical religion, but um, still religious in the sense of being devoted to a certain tradition and a certain practice of prayer and prophecy that has always been the accompaniment of that tradition. Um, it's a spiritual science, I think, as Rudolf Steiner would come to call it later. I'm going to upload this and then maybe do a little reading in another video.